My mother-in-law assaulted me while I was pregnant. Now my husband is defending her. There has not been a girl born on my husband's side of the family in more than 100 years. It's a huge running joke that the men in his family cannot produce female babies. So fast forward to our wedding day, and I've had a pretty good relationship with my mother-in-law up until this point. That was until the end of the night when we were getting ready to head to our honeymoon suite. She looks me dead in the eye and says, "Now go give us another boy." I nervously laughed and we departed. Well, ladies and gents, I indeed did make a beautiful baby with my husband over those 2 weeks, and who would have thought? A baby girl. And everyone was so shocked when we announced it was a girl, and most of the family denied it up until the moment she was born. That's when the horrible comments started. Whenever my husband wasn't around, my mother-in-law and her family members would make snarky comments like, "I wonder where she got that nose. It's definitely not my son's." Then we found out we were having a second baby. And wouldn't you know it, another girl. I begged my husband not to tell my mother-in-law the gender when we found out, as I just wanted to enjoy a bit more of this pregnancy before she ruined it. I had decided to keep the mean comments his mother made to me about our first daughter to myself, as she's 70 years old and in poor health. I felt guilty about potentially ruining their relationship. Regardless, he insisted on announcing it at our next visit, and nothing could prepare me for what happened next. As soon as she heard it was another girl, tears welled in her eyes and she started shaking her head back and forth and sobbing. She then started yelling at me, called me a cheater, and demanded I get out of her house. My husband immediately stands up and starts yelling at her, asking what her problem is, and that she needs to apologize to me. She says through broken wails, "Not ours. Those girls are not ours. She's a cheater. My son did not make those girls." I start crying hysterically and pick up my daughter, who is utterly confused as to why daddy is yelling at grandma and mommy is now crying. My mother-in-law then looks at me and starts yelling, "I let you get away with it the first time. I took you in as family. I allowed my son to believe he fathered that brat, but I will not allow it again." My husband starts screaming at her that she is out of line and how dare she call his daughter names. He then goes on to say that we are leaving, and until she comes to her senses, she will never see any of us again. She tried to say something more, but he cuts her off and yells at her, "By the way, Mom, I love that little girl more than I ever loved you," as he is shuttling us out the door. I broke down and told my husband all the little comments she and her family have said to me when he wasn't around while we drove the 2 hours home. He was so angry at them all and had been amazing in comforting me through it. We went no contact for a few months, and everything seemed to be going great. We blocked her and my father-in-law's phone numbers and hadn't heard from them except through other relatives over Facebook. Then, when I was nearing my due date, we decided to be the bigger person and reach out to his parents and offer them a chance to make things right. She whines and whines that she misses her son and granddaughter. We agreed to meet for dinner at their house after a few weeks for a proper talk and apology from her. We agreed that my daughter should not be present, so my sister was set to babysit her. We arrive, dinner is served, and we are trying to make small talk when my husband is like, "Yeah, Mom, this has all been nice, but we need to talk about what happened and the things you said last time we were here." I know, and you know that you owe my wife an apology. My mother-in-law then looks at my husband and says, "Yes, do you have the test?" "What?" he asks her. "The paternity test. I am not apologizing until I'm proven wrong. And we both know I'm right. You cannot be the father, and the fact that you have now apparently made 2 girls is ridiculous." He then asks her, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I start to cry and go to get up to grab my things and go to the car. She sees this and says, "Oh no, you don't." She shoots up, rounds the table and grabs my shirt, then proceeds to scream at me. "How dare you try to run away from this? You're a cheater and you need to own up to this problem." My husband screams at her to get her hands off of me and starts to make his way towards us. She then decides that I cannot be allowed to leave at any cost with her son, so she slaps me as hard as she can across my face. I push her arm away from me as I let out a scream from the shock of being slapped. My husband then gets in between me and his mom and starts to scream at her. He tells my father-in-law to call the cops right now. My father-in-law ignores him and tries to calm my mother-in-law down, insisting that we can deal with this. My husband is furious, and I'm crying hysterically. He grabs my hand and we are making our way to the door when my mother-in-law grabs a snow globe from a shelf and throws it directly at me, and it hits me right in the back of my head. It didn't shatter or anything, but it did end up hitting me on the base and cutting my head open. I fell to my knees from the pain, and before my husband can put together what just happened, she is grabbing anything she can find to throw in my direction. I'm on my knees on the ground, holding my head with one hand and my belly with the other, being almost 9 months pregnant, as a cascade of random items are being thrown at me. My husband is screaming at the top of his lungs for her to stop, and she proceeds to kick me as hard as she can. My husband pushes his mom and she falls back into a shelf by the front door and he rushes me out. I'm crying and freaking out and yelling, "She kicked my stomach," over and over, and he drives me to the hospital. I ended up getting 6 stitches in my head and being monitored in the hospital for 4 days because she kicked my belly. The baby ended up being fine, and the hospital demanded we file a police report. We find out that when my husband pushed his mom into the shelf, she ended up breaking 2 fingers and is claiming the excessive force hurt her neck very badly. My father-in-law called an ambulance for her, and she claimed that me and my husband assaulted her in her doorway after they refused to let us in for a free dinner. Cops showed up and took our side of the story and compared our own report that we filed once at the hospital. They told us that my mother-in-law was demanding to press charges against my husband for assault while we are pressing charges against her. My husband gets arrested, but then quickly released after my father-in-law is forced to tell the truth, and mother-in-law then gets arrested for my assault. My father-in-law begs us to drop the charges as no one was hurt, and that we are being cruel to lock up an elderly woman. We ignore him. This is when things take a turn for the worst. At first, my husband comforted me the whole time. We went no contact with his parents, and I genuinely thought he was on my side. I had come up with the idea to do paternity tests on our girls and send them to my mother-in-law to get back at her, and it seemed like a great idea. We got in contact with a lawyer, and he suggested that we take the paternity tests through the court. So we have it as evidence, and then the results couldn't be contested as fake. That sounded great, right? Well, over the next few days, my husband got more and more depressed. He started trying to get me to entertain the idea of minimizing my mother-in-law's actions and chalking up her behavior to old age. I told him that she will be getting full screenings for her mental health when we go to court, and that while, yes, she's old, she doesn't get to assault me and accuse me of horrible things and use her age as an excuse. If she's found to have some mental issues going on, then I can deal with that. But that doesn't mean I ever want to be around her or have her around my kids. A few days go by, and I'm nearing my induction day because my baby girl isn't making her entrance. And I find out that my husband has been talking with his parents behind my back. We get in a big fight, and he tells me that he still wants his mom to meet her granddaughter, and that we can put this aside until the baby is here. That once she's gotten to meet her, we can resume the legal issues. I am crying at this point as I thought he was supporting me through this, but in reality he caved in no less than 4 days to his mom. I reminded him that we have put in for a restraining order and no contact order, and that he has now broken it by contacting them. His response? Well, the no contact order is issued to you, not me. And the restraining order hasn't been approved yet, so my mom can come meet the baby before we get approved without breaking any rules. All I could do was shake my head and cry. I put my foot down and said absolutely not, and I couldn't believe he'd let his mom around me or the baby after she could have killed one of us. He said that I was overeating, as the baby was not injured, and she wasn't actually trying to hurt the baby, just me. I was dumbfounded. We got in a huge fight about me not forgiving her and being unreasonable, and eventually he just left. Come to find out, he went to his mom's house a few hours away. He then called me sobbing and told me that if I could see his mom right now, I'd understand. Apparently, when he pushed her while she was assaulting me, he indeed broke 2 of her fingers, and she sprained her neck when she fell back into a shelving unit. She's laid up on a sofa in her living room, can't walk, and in a severe depression. I should feel awful, according to him. The least I could do is let her meet her new grandchild, and then figure out where to go from there. I'm so infuriated at this point, because not only has he retreated to his mom's house, he left me alone with our oldest daughter, who is 2, while I'm supposed to be in bed rest, with stitches in my head, and a 8 lb baby in my uterus, who refuses to come out. He doesn't come home for the next 4 days until I'm supposed to check into the hospital for my scheduled induction. My sister comes to watch my oldest daughter, and my husband takes me to the hospital for the induction. We get set up and they are poking me with things, shoving arms up where they don't belong, pumping me with Pitocin and waiting to see if the baby will come. He mostly sat in the room on his tablet. Finally, the baby was starting to move down, and I was nearing the point where I needed to push. He ends up putting his tablet away and trying to get more involved. At this point, I wasn't going to push the support away, as I was literally trying to push a baby out of me. Finally, the baby starts to crown, and my husband looks at the baby's head, looks at the nurse standing next to the doctor, and asks, "When do you do the paternity test?" I stopped mid-push, looked at my husband, and screamed, "What the hell?" The nurse was silent, looking back and forth between me and my husband. I immediately start crying hysterically and babbling stuff like, "It's not like that. It's his baby. His mom is psycho." I immediately felt judged by the nurse and was robbed of the beautiful moment. My mind shut down, and the short time between crowning and when the baby came out ended up taking a long time because of how distraught I was. I asked him how could he do that to me. After the baby came out, I just held her. But I was so angry. I couldn't look at my husband, and I wouldn't let him hold her. He left, and when he came back about an hour later, he said that his mom wanted pictures of the baby. He took out his phone, and I smacked it out of his hand. He got angry and left. My sister had to pick us up from the hospital and take us home 2 days later. In my state, you have to take the baby back in 2 days after being home to do tests and a checkup to make sure the baby is okay. So we took her in for the check and then went to a clinic to do the paternity test the same day. The next few days at home were awful. I couldn't even look at him, and he avoided being around me or the baby for days. We got the results for the paternity test 3 days later, and he's the father. He cried and told me he never doubted it, and that he knew he was the dad. I told him that we would do a second test on our oldest daughter, and that I was going to start packing our stuff, and I was going to move in with my sister. He bawled and said he didn't need one for our oldest daughter. I demanded we take one, as I would want it as proof for court whenever we get to have my case heard. He tried to apologize and hug me, but I pushed him away and told him he should leave while I packed up some things.